Hello friends and welcome. I'm Sarah Liz and I am so excited to be back sharing a fun wintry project with you. These are the Embossed Edge Hills and Slopes dies. So we're going to use these to create some embossed hills, but if you use the other side, they don't have to be embossed. But since we're using that embossed edge, I'm also using this older set. It is the embossed circle, window, and panels to create some layers for our Slimline card. I love this Snowflake trio die set, and I have backed some glitter paper with some rip and stick sheets. Then I have the merry and bright sentiments, and then there's like little twinkle stars, which I also backed with rip and stick sheets. And then these are the insider sentiments. This stamp set is huge and it has so many great options. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. I am starting by cutting out a couple of hill and slope options using some white shimmer paper. And I am just going to tape these down, and then I will end up cutting these in half, right? So you can see there's that embossed edge and then a non-embossed edge. I'm going to try to maintain that embossed edge. And I have 4 different hills or slopes to choose from. And I'm not really worried about the bottom of each of these hills being parallel to the bottom of the card, because we're going to layer things and then we'll just trim it off the bottom. For now, I just need to figure out how high up my slopes are going to go, and then I'm going to use my pencil and just make a little mark. So when we go to ink blend our sky, I know how far down to go, and I'll just make sure that my hills go right up above that pencil line. I'm starting with milled lavender. I love blues and purples for winter and for holidays. And I'm creating sort of a bright spot on the horizon. Maybe it's the sun, maybe it's magic. I don't know. Is that cheesy? Maybe it's magic. But then once I kind of get that in there, I'm going to come around that with some shaded lilac to ease into broken china. And then I'll go back and forth. I am not trying to create an ombre from one color to the next, but rather I'm going back and forth with the blue and the purple to create this sort of speckled sky. These are all my favorite colors, and I just love the idea of bringing this sort of dreamy feel into a holiday card. So I'm going to come around with chipped sapphire and darken just the edges so that it's going to draw our eye towards the center, and that's where we'll put our sentiment. I'm also going to come in with just a little bit of spun sugar, just a touch right on that horizon, to lighten that up a little bit. I've got some metallic paint, and I'm just using the sort of white pearly color, and then I'll come in with a little bit of the palest gold. There is also a metallic watercolor set from Trinity that I don't have. I didn't even know it existed until after I made this card, that has some like blue metallic paint in there too. I will try to link that below as well. But whatever you have would work here. Those oxides are water reactive inks, and so you certainly could just flick it with some water as well. So these trees are in that same die set, the hills and slopes, and I am coming in, you could probably skip this part, but I did it, so I'm showing you. I'm coming in with my G2 of my Ohuhu alcohol markers, and I am just adding in some darkness in the places where there would be a little bit of shadowing on the trees. And then I'm going to come in next with my Versamarker pen. It is the same as your Versamark ink, but in pen form, and at least in my experience, not quite as sticky. So I'm using a flicking motion to try to get that ink kind of like the way it might fall and land onto the tree, and then I'll add some white embossing powder on top of that. If you don't have a Versamarker pen, you can use a paintbrush and just your Versamark pad and pick it up from there. But I found I got more coverage from my embossing powder, and I didn't like that as much. That would also be absolutely beautiful if you did it with some glitter embossing powder. I'm kind of wishing I'd done that now that I'm thinking about it. Next time we'll use glitter embossing powder. And then I'm going to take my panel and I am going to trim off just 1/8 of an inch all the way around, because I'm going to create some borders on my card using that embossed circle, window, and panels die set. Because my panel doesn't fit in my little tiny trimmer, I just use a little piece of like Post-it tape or mint tape or whatever to line it up with the edge of the blade and then mark it on one of those 1/4 inch marks. And then I measure it from the Post-it tape instead of all the way from the edge on the left. And so that's how I don't ever have to get a bigger trimmer out. I am going to start adding my hills, and I'm starting with this one in the back, and I'm making sure that I am covering up that little pencil mark that was right on the horizon. I was like, make sure I blend down to that. But once that Distress Oxide ink covers it, there is no erasing that. There's no way I'm going to be able to get back in there and get rid of that. And so then I'm going to use a little bit of temporary tape just on the side to remind me of where I want this panel to go. And I'm going to bring the glue about a 1/4 inch from the top. I want to be able to tuck some trees behind this panel. And this way I can get all of that sort of laid out and arranged before I start adding my trees, and I still have room to tuck things behind there. I'm trimming stuff off as I go along, but then down at the bottom, I had 2 layers of cardstock from the hills and then my flat card base. So I'm just using some of the scraps of that same cardstock to build that up and make sure that it's the same height as everything else, so I don't look like my bottom hill is kind of saggy. Then I'll add glue, and I'm just going to line this one up with the very bottom of the card, though certainly you could overhang and trim that off like we've been trimming off all of the other pieces. And that is going to get us to the point where we can start adding all of our wintry trees. I'm using wet glue for my trees, so I get a little bit of wiggle room. And I wanted this to feel organic and to feel like the scene extended beyond the edges of the card. And so you'll see in some places I have trees that ever so slightly overlap each other. I'll end up trimming off the sides where a couple of my trees are hanging off the edge. This tree in the front, I love this one. He's like sort of heavy and shaggy, and like I identify strongly with that tree. I don't know, but he's my favorite. And then I love that you also get this mix of these really sort of skinny little trees. And I just took a brown marker on the trunks of those skinny ones where you see the trunk and colored those brown. And it comes right up to our snow, our little embossing powder there. And that works out really well. So then I'll just flip it over and I've got the 2 trees hanging off the edge. Honestly, I could have kept those, and maybe especially that bigger one, might have been able to hang it off the other side and extended the scene a little bit more, but I'm pretty happy with it how it is. Then I'm coming in with my Distress Glaze. This is a Ranger product, like the same people who make your Distress inks and Oxide inks and whatever. It's to seal it in and protect it, but really I like it because it makes the colors pop more. Like that lighter blue in the sky all of a sudden seems to glow a little bit more. So I just use a domed foam applicator and sort of run that all over everything, and then I use a dry cloth to buff off any of the extra. I'm going to start assembling my Merry and Bright sentiment, and I've cut the shadow from some vellum and then the word and shadow at the same time from some white cardstock just as a template. And then I have my glitter cardstock for just the letters, and I've backed it with some rip and stick sheets. And that makes this really, really quick and easy to put together. So I can just pick them up and stick them right in there, and that sentiment is done in no time, and I don't have to worry about glue oozing out from underneath, and then I can't get that shadow layer back off again. So I did the same thing with Bright. I'm just laying it in there, and then I can remove that shadow layer, and then I'll do it again with the ampersand from our Merry and Bright, and then my sentiment is ready to go. But when I lay it onto my background, I just felt like it wasn't standing out enough from all of that ink blending that we'd done. So I cut it out one more time, and this time I put the rip and stick sheet on the front. So I'm essentially sticking these down upside down onto the back of the vellum just to create a little bit of lift between the card base and my sentiment. It's a small thing, but I felt like it really helped the sentiment to stand out against an otherwise pretty bold background. So once I figure out that it's Merry and Bright and not Bright and Merry, I'll just add a little bit of wet glue onto the cardstock that is on the back of the sentiment. And I'm not worried about getting it everywhere. Like those thin little pieces, I don't want the glue oozing out. So I'm just going to stick to the really thick parts because I'm using the shadow layer. I have the option to do that. and it's not a big deal. I also don't want glue oozing onto the vellum because you can kind of see that, and I'm picky. I'm also using my reverse tweezers to help me get the placement just right. I want the Merry and the Bright to be straight, but I also want to make sure I'm getting my sort of placement right. I want to put some stars in here still, and I want the and to be centered between them. So I did the and last. I find it easiest to get that definitely centered when I'm sure where the other two are going to be. And once I get all of those down, I will bring in all those little twinkly bits. I am going to use my little pickup tool for this because I want to be able to see where they are, and this lets me kind of hold it over the top and hover it in place before I press down. It's also worth noting that that micro glaze helps give me a little bit of wiggle room that I don't know that I would get with rip and stick sheets without that, right? Like, it's pretty sticky stuff, but it's almost like there's a very thin barrier in between the two. Like, you can see me kind of moving things around and straightening them out. Once I pressed them down, they weren't going anywhere, but I have them sort of laying gently on top of all of that. Once I'm happy with it though, I'll give them all a good press, and then they're stuck down for good. I've added some thin foam tape on the back of my panel and then a whole bunch of wet glue because I was really nervous about getting it straight. And in fact, I didn't get it straight. So I'm just going to peel that right back off, and I will try laying it down one more time. That silver piece I have cut using one of the embossed panels from the Embossed Circle window and panels. And I love that that ties into the sort of embossed edge on our hills as well. And then once all of that is put together, I can start working on the inside of my card. This is the Insider Sentiments, and there are so many absolutely magical options in here. And this is one of my very favorites. It says, the gift of love, the gift of peace, the gift of happiness. May all these be yours this Christmas. And there's something in the cadence of that one that just feels sort of dreamy and magical, like the front of the card. And so I'm going to use some pale purple ink that is similar in color, and I'm going to stamp that towards the top. And then I wanted to add one of our snowflakes from the Snowflake Trio set in the bottom corner, but it's that same white glitter cardstock. And so I'm going to come in with some pale teal ink and just give myself a little bit of a background, a little bit of purple in there too, just for some variation and a little bit of pop, tie it into all the other purples on the card. Then I will grab my favorite from that Snowflake Trio that I've turned into a sticker with my rip and stick sheet, and I will just press that right into the corner there and trim off the excess with my scissors. I can now adhere the front of my card to my card base, and I'll just use a little bit of wet glue to help me get that all lined up. I press on it from the back to make sure I'm not going to smear anything or catch on the edges of any die cuts. But that will finish up our card for today. I hope you've enjoyed creating this wintry scene with me. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and then click that subscribe button so you won't miss the next crafty card project. And I will see you next time.